We'll now look at two more branches of philosophy: metaphysics and social philosophy. Metaphysics is the philosophical investigation of reality. And one sort of sub-branch of metaphysics is what's called ontology. This is the study aimed at determining the constituents of reality, what metaphysical entities make up the world. It's from the Greek word ontos, which means thing, although I often mistranslate ontos into stuff, one of my favorite words. Philosophers sometimes speak of a person's ontological zoo. It's a collection of entities, metaphysical entities, that a philosopher accepts as being real. It could be things like universals, or it could be things like space, or time, or alternative realities. Now, the term metaphysics comes from our good dead friend Aristotle, kind of indirectly. The story goes that a person was putting together a collection of Aristotle's books, and Aristotle had a book called Physics, and the book after Physics, they needed a name for it, so they called it Metaphysics. So after physics, hence that's the story. Now, metaphysics has a wide range of problems in terms of the ones that it tries to examine. Although someone like David Hume argued that metaphysics itself had a lot of problems. And one of the classic battles in philosophy is about whether we should do metaphysics at all. And some argue that metaphysics is essentially, crazy BS, so get rid of it. Other people say that it's something worth doing, and some say it's crazy BS, but we should totally keep doing that crazy stuff. But here are some classic metaphysical problems. One, which I actually did my dissertation on, is what's known as the problem of universals, which is put in the question form of, in virtue of what are individual entities grouped into types? So, for example, all humans are humans, but what is it metaphysically, if anything, that makes us all humans? Now, in addition to having interest, theoretically, metaphysically, this question about universals, as we'll see when we talk about metaphysics in the later part of the course, leads to a wide range of pretty interesting problems and sometimes even violence. For example, in medieval times, there were questions about the nature of God and the Trinity, to accept it or reject it, and that ties into universals. And this may seem kind of odd, but we'll see how that goes. Also, when you have debates about, are things like race, are they real? Is gender a real thing? And this gets us into metaphysics. Are they merely things that, labels we put on things, or do they have a reality, a metaphysical reality behind them? There's also the problem of personal identity. And this involves two parts. One is the person part. What makes a person a person? Now, we generally tend to think, human is person, person is human, problem solved. But if we think about it a bit and maybe get into, some science fiction or fantasy, depending on, what kind of interest you might have, or both, if you like both of those things, we know that in fictional context, TV shows, movies, games, there are various non-humans that seem to be people. For example, in Star Trek, you've got Vulcans and Romulans and Klingons and Andorians and Tellarites and Tholians and so forth. In the fantasy worlds, you have the classical elves and dwarves and orcs. And so if we were to encounter such things, aliens and for real, there wouldn't be human, but it would seem they could very well be people. There's also various moral concerns about this. For example, you can look at debates over some aspects of euthanasia, whether a person who's suffered severe brain damage would still be a person. I mean, they would still obviously be human, but a question would be, is there still a person there. And it all depends on what we mean by person. And one problem we'll see when we talk about our good dead friend John Locke is people tend to kind of smush together person, human, man and woman together, and Locke is careful to distinguish between these for good reasons. The second part of it is the identity part. What makes, what gives that person their identity? What makes them distinct from all the things? Put crudely, why aren't you me and why am I not you? And it seems like kind of obvious, well, I'm not you, you're not me. But the question is, how does that work out metaphysically? There's also the classic problem of the mind. Philosophy of mind, what is the mind? Some, like Descartes and many religious thinkers, believe the mind is the soul, a spirit, a non-physical, incorporeal entity. Others believe that the mind is the physical nervous system. You are your brain. And some believe, who are into computers, would contend that, yes, your brain is really important, but your mind is the set of, programs and algorithms and functions. That's what makes up you. And this has interesting implications, philosophy of mind and the problem of personal identity, for the very important question of what happens, if anything, after you die. And we'll look at that problem. There's also the mind-body problem, which really got rolling with our good dead friend Descartes and his Cartesian dualism. His view is, we'll see more of this in the future, that you are your mind, but you have a body. And the obvious question is, how does the ghost, the mind, control the shell? How does it drive around the body? And Descartes tried to solve that, and most people think that he did not. People who followed him came up with various other solutions, but it's still a problem today. Namely, how does the ghost control the machine? There's also the matter of what philosophers call modality, possibility and necessity. And this becomes interesting when you think of it in the context of fiction, or maybe real stuff in physics. If you've like sci-fi, many science fiction shows and movies feature alternative worlds or alternative timelines. For example, the reboot of Star Trek features an alternative timeline from the original universe. And there are various there's TV series like one like Sliders, for example, where people could travel between alternative worlds. And that's a metaphysical matter. Are there other worlds, other possible worlds, alternative realities? And then, of course, the problem of reality. What is truly real for real? Now, there are many questions in metaphysics and ontology. Some connect to religion, like, does God exist? And if he does, what is his nature? What is a person? What are space and time? What is real? Is time travel possible? Like in The Time Machine and Doctor Who, and Time Cop, of course, can't forget that. Do ghosts exist? And if they do, what are they? Is there an afterlife? Are properties metaphysical entities like Plato claimed? Do possible worlds, alternative realities, do they exist? Are there multiple dimensions? And so a lot of the weird sci-fi fantasy stuff in philosophy ends up in metaphysics. And it's an attempt to study rationally that kind of weird stuff. Now, switching away from weird metaphysics to social philosophy, this also includes political philosophy, etc. And this is, broadly speaking, the philosophy of all the social sciences, society and social sciences, which include philosophy of economics, philosophy of history, philosophy of sociology, philosophy of anthropology, philosophy of political science, and all the others. Now, kind of the one of the big sub-branches of this is political philosophy, which is the study of the nature and justification of coercive institutions. Because states are all about, coercion. Their fundamental function is basically military defense and policing, coercing others. And what else a state should be builds from there. And people, as you might imagine, debate a great deal about exactly what the state should be doing and whether it should even exist or not. And we'll look at this in the course of the course when we talk about the anarchists who believe there should not be any state. There's also another sub-branch is philosophy of law, which is the study of the nature and justification of law. While it's true that we just make up laws, there are deep questions here about what laws should be and what foundation they have, if any. For example, some claim that law should be based on religion, that God's law should be our law. There are those who think it should be based on ethics, that what is good should be, enforced by the law to make us good, and what is bad, morally bad, should be forbidden. Now, there are many classic problems in social philosophy. One of the most basic ones is the problem of the state. What is the basis of the authority of the state? Officials in countries, take the United States, for example, the president and people in Congress and police officers, they expect that you just do what they tell you to do, when they're operating within their job. And a good question is, what's the basis of that? The police have guns and, the president can send people to kill you. But laying aside, the threat of, murder and so on, what is the basis of their authority? Why morally should we accept them? And some people, like the anarchists, say we shouldn't. They're just, they're just people with guns. Yeah, practically you don't want to get shot, but they have no real authority. There's also the problem of rights. What are rights? If they do exist, what are they? What are they based on? The United States, for example, is a rights-based country, and the rights in the United States, at least in the Declaration of Independence and American political philosophy, is based largely in part religion. The idea that we were created with inalienable rights, which is taken from our good dead friend John Locke, who argued that we have a natural right to life, liberty, and property, not pursuit of happiness. That was thrown in by the founding fathers. And as I can't really call it a joke, it's not super funny, but the claim is, of course, they used pursuit of happiness because they had all the property and wanted to not give people ideas. There's also the problem of law. What should we base our laws on? Religion? Ethics? Serving the best interest of the rich? Do whatever the rich tell us to do? The working class? What should it be? There's also the problem of the individual and the state. To what extent should the state control individuals? Which ties into the classic problem of liberty and security. To what extent should liberties be restricted in order to provide security? And this is always relevant. For example, after 9/11, there was a huge increase in security approaches. If you've flown since then, all the stuff you have to go through. And so you get scanned and patted down. They go through all your stuff. And the idea is you give up some liberty to be safe. Similarly, having any restriction on our freedoms to make us safe raises this question. Now, I'm recording this during the COVID-19 pandemic. There are people protesting, having to, wear masks and social distance, and they're raising, in their own way, this question. Does the state have the right to limit people's freedom to go around without masks, to travel as they will, to run their business, to go and get their hair cut and, buy hamburgers in order to keep people safe from a pandemic, or do they not? Now, of course, and we'll talk more about this in the future, there is, of course, the key question here of, does the thing that's supposed to make us safer, does it really make us safer? If the answer is no, then it's obviously not worth trading liberty to get that because you're getting nothing. Now, even if it does make us safer, there's also the fundamental question of, is it worth the price? And as you might imagine, people disagree a great deal about this, how much you should give up to get a certain degree of safety. There are, of course, many questions in social philosophy, like what are rights? What is justice? What is the ideal state? What justifies laws? What is the basis of political authority? Should limits be placed on the power of the state? And many, many more. So that brings us to the end of our brief look at metaphysics and social philosophy. And next time, we'll pick up looking at some of the other branches of philosophy, which are pretty much everything you can stick philosophy of, or of philosophy in either in front of or behind.